Yojimbo is a character in Senjutsu whose main gimmick revolves around the concept of contracts. His rule card states that he gets 5 contracts at the beginning of the game. You get to choose 5 among these 6 contracts and then complete them as the game goes on. Every time a contract is completed, you get to flip it like so, and then when a contract is completed like this, before your draw, you get to discard it, and then you either draw a card or gain 1 focus. If any 5 contracts have been completed, you win the game no matter what. This doesn't mean that you have to complete 5 different contracts. You can complete the same contract 5 times, and then you still win the game. However, some contracts can only be completed once, like First Blood and Tools of the Trade. The way that you complete a contract multiple times is by using Yojimbo's core card and using its second effect to return a contract to your play area face up. This means that if you have used a contract after completing it, you discard it, and then you use Yojimbo's core card, you can just put it back face up. And there you go, you have the same contract to be used all over again. In this deck, made by Knektebroe, sorry if it was mispronounced, you are meant to mostly loop this contract, the focus contract. It is one of the easiest contracts to loop for the deck, as the other ones require you to either hit attacks for the case of Show Them and Rampage, which are also loopable, or block in the case of Counter and Show Them. With focus, basically any card that uses or makes focus is going to be adding to your win condition. Therefore, we have 16 cards that use focus and 18 cards that add focus. These 18 cards are differentiated by cards that change Kamae, like Trained Mind and Skull Cutter and Leg Breaker, and the cards that just straight up give focus, like Iron Guard and Senbon Throw, or in the case of Calm Defense in yellow, you do get both. Now, the reason why changing Kamae is basically the same as gaining focus is because you are mostly going to be bouncing around red and yellow during these games, and therefore it also makes cards that are used in green quite a bit worse, because it is a bit of an inconvenience. As I said, you are meant to be completing these 6 contracts. You will select 5 at the beginning of the game, but all of them are technically completable in the deck, with Show Them having the least number of cards that can be used to complete it, with only 4. This is because you do have 7 golds in the deck, but 3 of them cannot hit or block, being instead meditations, or in the case of evasive step, a defense that doesn't block. Now, let's talk about focus. Completing the focus contract is pretty easy to do multiple times, partly because, well, completing a contract means that you get more focus, therefore you already get more fuel for this, and also because usually using up focus means that you get some pretty good effects. Cards like Focused Exertion let you use up a ton of focus to do a ton of effects. Another good thing about focus is that you can very easily build it. Trained Mind, for example, gives you 2 focus on its own. A lot, and I do mean a lot, of Yojimbo's core cards just change Kamae for no reason. Brutal Strike, Skull Cutter, Leg Breaker, or Senbon Throw just gives 1 focus. Iron Guard just gives 1 focus, and all of these are just Yojimbo exclusive cards. Put some Calm Defenses, Rolling Slashes, and Stone Blocks on top of it, and you're generating more focus than you know what to do with. Or you do know what to do with it because you also have 16 cards that use up focus, from Blood Fury Cut, which is a universal Jade card, but it is very useful for another contract, to Quick Stab, which at the same time uses and generates focus. Self-Control, or any field contract, fits this role because it uses 1 focus to be played, and then you can yourself spend the 2 focus to get rid of it on the board, which means 2 instances of focus, which means rotating this twice, which means you've basically completed half a contract by just using 3 focus before you even got to play a card. Now, this is, of course, only a good thing if you are then planning to instantly generate more focus with using something like Trained Mind or blocking with Calm Defense. So do be cautious not to do it when you actually need your focus. Now, let me real quickly go over all the other contracts. First Blood is probably the most important contract outside of focus. It is widely agreed upon that if you do not get First Blood, you do not go for a contract win. We only have 9 cards that really play into this, these being cards that either have a long range, like Lunging Thrust, which can be used from 3 spaces away, to cards like Quick Stab, which are at speed 8. I actually forgot to put it here, but another really useful card for this contract is Scorpion Sting, which when you're an aggressive is also a speed 8 approach. Keep this card in mind, it will come up several times. The reason why First Blood is such a pivotal contract is because you also start off with Hired Killer. If you want to go for Focus, this is also a really easy way to just trigger it an extra time, but it also very easily just gets you a lot of very decent cards. For example, the card I mentioned before, Scorpion Sting, can be searched off this if you use up one Focus. And another very important card, Senbon Throw, can be added off of this. But we'll get to both of these more when we talk about Tools of the Trade. And also because you can complete it really quick, unlike, for example, Tools of the Trade and Focus, which take several cards to be done, First Blood just requires you to nail one attack and then you're good. Rampage is another very interesting contract. You can't exactly engineer it, but you can go for it. It requires 2 or more players to be wounded at the same turn. So this just means that you and your opponent get hit on the same turn. But if you are playing in teams, yes, 2 or more players can be wounded without you even having to get a wound. Or if you're playing a co-op campaign, 2 players can be wounded without you getting a wound. So do think about that too if you are playing any format that isn't just 1v1 PvP. The cards that are singled out for this contract are cards that usually give you a decent bit of advantage, or cards that just help you complete other contracts. Hail Strike is only here because it is a very slow attack, and I genuinely do not know what else to put it in. The only other place I can imagine it is in First Blood if you get a counter, but that's me stretching it. With cards like Quick Stab, like I said, both use and gain focus, making it very easy to get a very positive trade. Skull Cutter will do something to mess your opponent up, either giving them a stun or switching them to neutral, and it will also change one Kamae for you, giving you a lot of advantage with one attack. Leg Breaker is very fast, changes your Kamae, and if you are for some reason in green, applies Hobble, and Brutal Strike can do 2 wounds and makes you view your opponent's hand and makes you change Kamae. If you manage to land this card, it doesn't matter if your opponent also hits you for 2, you're probably still in an advantageous position. Tools of the Trade is probably my favorite out of all of these. I don't know how to describe it other than this one seems like a very funny contract. And when I first started playing Yojimbo, this was my favorite one to try building a deck around, and I feel like this next deck did a pretty good job at building around it, aside from one problem we'll get to. Blood Fury Cut on its own applies 3 of these. It applies Hobble, a Stun, and Bleed, which makes it much better than Yojimbo's 2 unique shades for the purposes of this deck. Scorpion Sting applies Poison. Now, this is very interesting, because this is the only way to get Poison in this deck, and you will have to play around it fairly decently. I mean, you don't have to, but you probably should. Senbon Throw, in that same way, is the only non-Blood Fury Cut way to apply Bleed. And again, you will have to play around this move really well. And for these 2, same as all the cards mentioned in the Rampage, you will probably be at an advantage if you manage to land them, even if you have a trade. Also, landing Scorpion Sting, then getting hit, means that you get to complete, if this is the first attack in the game, means that you get to complete First Blood, you get complete Contract, you get 1 tick of Tools of the Trade, and you get 1 tick of Focus. This card will make or break some of your games, and a lot of the time it will be making them. Stone Block, Feint Cut, and Skull Cutter all give stuns, same with Splitting Strike. And then we have Leg Breaker. Now, this is the part where I feel this deck is a bit weird. Leg Breaker is the only non-Blood Fury Cut way to inflict Hobble in this deck, and it is only done in green. If you are making this deck on your own, firstly, I will say there is a glitch that I've been experiencing where when importing in the Tabletop Simulator, Scorpion Sting isn't in the deck, so make sure that it is. But secondly, I would recommend getting another way to put Hobble on the opponent, which we will get to, of course, later in the video. But keep it in mind that this is going to make Tools of the Trade a bit harder to fulfill. Show Them is the one that you will probably be not doing. Or, okay, this card probably is enough to justify putting Show Them into your contracts pile. Dirt Throw is a slightly insane card. Unblockable attack that is an instant replacement means that Show Them is fairly easy to complete if you manage to draw it, and with an instant replacement emergency block, it also means that you can pretty easily block something. Splitting Strike and Brutal Strike are a bit more gambly in that sense, where you kind of have to have a situation for them. However, Splitting Strike still is a card that you will basically always run if you are running this restricted school, because it is also a really useful card for the First Blood contract, as anything that approaches 2 is pretty good. And the last contract is counter. Whenever you get a counter, you can complete this. Now, this one is a bit weird. Yojimbo has a pretty good counter move. Iron Guard blocks 7 to 5, not the greatest range, but has some pretty good effects if you manage to actually block. Pushing 2 if you're in red, and getting advantage if you're in yellow, gaining 1 focus no matter what, and having a mandatory movement at 4. But it has a counter at 6, and as you hopefully know, 6 is probably the most common initiative for an attack in this game. So you have pretty decent odds if you're doing an okay enough job at treating your opponent to be able to counter with Iron Guard. Same with Stone Block that counters at 5 to 3 and blocks 6 to 2. Also produces focus and puts a stun on the opponent, same way that Iron Guard hopefully will put a stun on the opponent if you are in red. So these two are still fairly useful tools to have. Calm Parry, I'm a bit iffy about, but in certain matchups having 1 copy is really good, so I would still recommend it. Now, Nagamaki Thrust is a Yojimbo exclusive core attack, and as you can see, it is pretty good. Hits from range 3, and you can use up focus to apply a hobble or a stun. This is your other way to apply hobble, and probably the one that you're gonna have to go for. Putting your win condition onto your core card is not something that I really like, but considering the deck doesn't run that many instant replacements, and considering that you can hit it from a range 3, I can see it. Now, I would like to, before discussing possibilities, discuss the things that you can prepare. Like I already talked about, Hard Killer is probably a card that you would want to prepare. You can also prepare Focused Exertion, which might be recommended if you really want to be going all in on focus, but I wouldn't really recommend it because it uses up a lot of focus way too early in the game, and you already run 3 copies of it. And another card that you can very easily and risklessly prepare is Calm Defense. Fairly important thing to know about this deck list is that it does not run field bandages. One of the reasons is exactly Focused Exertion. It lets you get rid of stuns fairly easily while drawing the cards to replace it, the same way that field bandages would, but it notably does not get rid of bleeds. This means that getting bled is fairly dangerous as well. You just do not have a way to counter it. You don't have a field bandage to get rid of it. Now let's imagine it is round start. Imagine there's some stage in between. In this scenario, you want to have some sort of meditation. Something like Trained Mind is probably the best, as it changes to, through 2 Kamae at the same time. If you're in yellow, you get to see your opponent's hand, and you can very easily get to yellow by just going red into yellow, gaining a focus. And you also get to move a pretty decent amount. An example of a move would be that you just get to approach 2, and your opponent uses core and gets to approach 1. And this is another really good scenario to find yourself in, because now your opponent is at range 3. And this is about where we would want to be at the start of the game. This is another reason why Trained Mind is so good, because you get to this exact range if your opponent already approached 1. Now, why is this range so good? Firstly, we already discussed Nagamaki Thrust. If you manage to use Trained Mind turn 1, you can go into aggressive, then into yellow. You get 1 focus, and now you have 1 focus that you can spend on Nagamaki Thrust's hobble, which means that you've completed 1/4 of Tools of the Trade and 1/4 of focus. On top of this, you also have some different threats at this range. One of the most important ones is, of course, the almighty Splitting Strike. If you are in red, that means that Splitting Strike is going to be doing quite a bit of damage. Getting 2 wounds and a stun is enough to put you at a decent enough advantage to start snowballing the game from there. Your opponent has to get rid of a card, and they've already taken 40% of the damage that they are able to take. Another threat that your opponent is under, if you are in red especially at this time, is Lunging Thrust. Does, again, 2 wounds and a stun, same as Splitting Strike, and again, hits from range 3 at speed 6. However, this all does mean that your opponent can just block at 6, and they are pretty safe. But then you can just get rid of all their focus, or if you already built up 2 focus, you get to make them discard a card, and you get advantage. Either way, Dark Aura is also one of the better starts in the game if your opponent has started 1 step forwards. Let's say that this is the beginning position, you play Dark Aura, you get a mandatory step forward 2, you're now in the range of 3, and you get your advantage. Yippee! Here, against characters like Yasuke, Bugeisha, and Monk, you are in a bit of a problem here. Yes, you can hit them, but they can also probably hit you. But the thing is, that is kind of what you want. What you would want to have is counter cards, especially Iron Guard. We already established that a lot of cards that hit from this range are at speed 6, Splitting Strike, Lunging Thrust, and even Yasuke's Lion's Bite, for example. And as a Yojimbo at this range, no matter who you're playing against, they are now playing rock, paper, scissors. If you have Iron Guard, you can not only counter them and get first blood through that, you can also Lunging Thrust or Splitting Strike or just use your core card to hit them as is. If your only way to counter is your core card, then you are still kind of messed up, but hopefully you have managed to draw enough through your first few turns before getting to range 3 that you have managed to get all of your pieces. And of course, if you have engaged and then disengaged and then you're back in this position and you manage to use Hired Killer, it would be good if you managed to set that hand up. After this point is when your game plan is going to start to diverge. If you manage to get your first blood, you are going for the contract win. You can of course pivot at any point if you see that you can very easily kill the opponent, but if you don't get first blood, you don't go for the contract win. Keep it simple, keep it plain. Unless your opponent is trying to stall you out and you can use focus like 10 billion times, like if you're playing against a bad ninja or assassin, then yeah, maybe then you can just use focus while stalling by just getting out focused exertions. Now, let's just look at another scenario. So this is a situation that you will find yourself in eventually. And the thing is, this deck does not have anything magical for this scenario, but it won't be that bad. The thing is, if you happen to be in yellow, you do always have the option of an emergency block because, well, you get to just... assuming that the opponent is going to use something that can be emergency blocked. If they sidestep, well, you're just kind of fucked. But for that, you're probably not going to block. You are probably going to use a meditation. This is one of the cases where focused exertion is kind of amazing, because if your opponent is gambling that you just can't block, then you can focus exertion, run away, and now you're in a pretty good position. Or, considering that you are standing like this, you can even go behind them, depending on, of course, which move they go for. And of course, if you really have nothing, you trained mind, you just piss off, you're probably gonna take at least one wound. Hopefully it's only one. Depending on the character you're playing against, this might just be a guaranteed 2 wound situation if you didn't draw focused exertion, and sometimes it is so even if you do. So do be wary of Forest Step or any move that can get you into this situation. One last card that can get you out of this is Dark Aura, simply stepping you forward twice, but considering that it doesn't turn you around very well, only letting you turn around once, you are still in a pretty bad situation, and since it was at speed 2, you probably got hit, so I would not go for this very often. Late game. You would ideally have completed at least 3 contracts by now. You got first blood, you hopefully completed 1 focus, and probably show them. Sure. Between Rampage, Show Them, and Counter, at this point you should have completed at least 1 of them, and Tools of the Trade should be on its last stage. At this point, you are winning in 2 ways. Unless your opponent is still on like wounds, you're in a pretty threatening position, wherein you can run away and just re-get focus, get Tools of the Trade whichever way you can, get the focus completed, and then you've just won outright. Now, one important card, and yes, I know I've mentioned it so many times in this video, but one important card at this stage of the game is Scorpion Sting. Let's say that we are talking about that same example again. You have completed these 3 contracts, already gotten focus back, and you are standing like this. This doesn't look like a very threatening position now, does it? But let's say you are in red and you have 2 focus. Now your opponent has to fear death. even if they only have 2 wounds, with Scorpion Sting you can turn around, step forwards, at speed 8 mind you, because you are in red, use up 2 focus, and now you rotate your focus 1, you get tools of the trade, so now you only have to use 3 more focus to win the game, but also your opponent is at 3 wounds, and you get to give them a Virulent Venom. This card on its own means that you get to spin the game around past. With Scorpion Sting, putting Virulent Venom on the opponent means that even if they only have 2 wounds, they are in constant danger as long as you have 2 focus. And if you had somehow 3 focus on you, now they are in danger of you quick stabbing. If you weren't in red, but we're gonna say that, I don't know, you hit a slow Scorpion Sting somehow. Not only is this card very important because it's the only way that you apply your poison, it's also a very important card to swing the game in your direction. On top of it, it also makes your opponent discard 1 card, which, yeah, I don't think I need to say why making your opponent discard is really good. If you manage to get Senbon Throw on early, you do actually have the win con of making your opponent bleed. As we already established, at far ranges, Yojimbo has the advantage. So your opponent can't ever really just try to approach. I mean, they can try, but they're not guaranteed to not just get hit by your core card if they do. Depending on which character they're playing, this range means that they are trying to attack already, and as we know, that is a range that you can defend fairly easily. Senbon Throw and Scorpion Sting are your most vital cards in the early and late game, respectively. Senbon Throw is an easy way to put up bleed, gain focus, and in the case that you're in yellow, draw cards, while Scorpion Sting is one of the easiest ways to make the game go back into your direction, put a lot of stress on your opponent, and of course, just get a cheap hit in while you're in aggressive, as not even Quick Stab can hit at this angle. If you are making this deck on your own, let me just give a few recommendation cards before you do so. First up is, of course, Field Bandages. Bleed is still a prevalent threat, even if you are playing Yojimbo, and even if you're playing Focused Exertion to get rid of stuns. Field Bandages is about the most consistent way to get rid of it, and considering you're playing in yellow half the time, it is good to just be able to draw 2 cards. Benevolence is a card that I recommend in a lot of decks. It just lets you access all of your good tools. It can add you Scorpion Sting, it can add you Senbon Throw. I will be shilling these cards until the day that I die. Now, these are, Respect and Honesty, I put them as just placeholders for any field Bushido. I don't know if they have a common name, but Bushido cards that stay on the field and have to use up 2 focus to be spent. These ones do require 2 focus to be used, so you can't place them and get rid of them on the same turn, but they have a bit more useful effects. So if you play a deck that can play around them, they can do a bit more work. Killing Blow lets you play Hobble without having to land your core, and of course it also puts a bit of distance between you and the opponent, which if you manage to use this by using, for example, a Quick Stab, then you can put a distance of 1 between you and the opponent, and now you're threatening a Lunging Thrust. Quick Dodge, it's a good card, changes 1 command to generate focus, but it does only really that. It's a defense that doesn't counter, making running it while having the counter contract a bit more dodgy, but I would still generally recommend it. And lastly, Swift Mind. This is my least recommended recommendation, but I would still recommend considering this card because it's a pretty good movement at speed 6. Like I discussed, when you're facing away from your opponent, you do not have that many meditations that you can use that have a chance of dodging, with the fastest one being Focused Exertion. So having something that can move you by 2 at speed 6 gives you some decent defenses at least, even if it's a meditation and will be hit by all speed 6 attacks, at least if your opponent isn't hobbled. This deck list is available in both aeon.net form and TTS form in the description. Check it out, and the deck repository that is also in there. Also, do join the Stone Sword Games Discord server. Please play this game. Play it on Tabletop Simulator, join the tournaments. The game is so fun, not enough people play it. If you are watching this and you are for some reason not a Senjutsu player, become one. Thank you. Bye.